Welcome Rabbi Mary Zamor, who is the Associate Rabbi at B'nai Or in Morristown, New Jersey. In addition, she is the editor of Sacred Table, which just became a finalist in the National Jewish Book Prize. She is the consulting editor on the new Haggadah from the CCR Press called Sharing the Journey, and we are privileged to be studying with her today. Mary, it's all yours.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you to Adam for all of his technical support. Well, welcome, and I'm looking forward to studying with you all today. Let's begin with our blessing for Torah study. Please say these words with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us through your commandments and commanded us to engage in words of Torah.
Amen.
Well, as you all know, Purim is over, but we're going to linger a little longer with Queen Esther. And so, as we do, we're going to begin with an opinion poll, which Adam is going to launch at this point. And we invite you all to think about this question. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, how empowered do you think Esther was? The poll's now going to be opened, and I invite you all to vote. 1, of course, is like super wimpy. She just does whatever she's told, and 5 is super empowered. So we're going to wait for the results of that poll. And Adam, do we have it?
Yep, we still have. I'm going to let some more votes come in.
Notes coming in.
We've got about 76% of attendees have voted, so just feel free, just click on one of those numbers and.
We're up to 82% of you have voted.
All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. Okay.
Okay, the poll is closed, and we see that 43% of you think that it's around a 3, and yet 43% of you believe it's around a 4. Nobody thinks it's a 5. 7% thinks it's a 1, and 7% thinks it's a 2. So, of course, there's no right answer. But one of the things that I've come to realize is the way that we as a Jewish community tell the story of Purim, and especially of Esther, has shifted so much within my own lifetime. So the first stop on our journey in terms of my memory of the way Esther has been taught to me personally, and perhaps this will resonate for many of you, and certainly if any of you want to chime in on this, feel free, is when I was a child, I have very strong memories of being at Hebrew school, and even in the books my family had in our home, of Queen Vashti, first of all, being painted as a very bad queen because she did not listen to her husband. And of course, we're told that literally in the story of the Megillah, but that being told to young Jewish girls is an interesting thing. And in my picture books, she was always depicted as someone who was very dark and slightly sinister, where Esther was described as a very good girl because she was obedient and she listened to all the men in her life. And she herself, in the imagery presented in these books, was fair-skinned and very blonde and blue-eyed and a true princess. Now, as I grew older, I started to study Jewish feminism and to enter the world of Jewish feminism. I found that Vashti was being held up as a hero, a heroine, someone who stood up for herself, protected herself physically, protected the station of her queenhood, and spoke out and protected herself even at great risk and personal peril. And Esther, on the other hand, was still the good girl. Now, just this very Purim, I enjoy teaching with and working with the Godcast cast. If you're familiar with that, it's G-D cast. They're wonderful 4-minute cartoons that teach the weekly Torah portion, and now they've also made holidays available. And for Purim, they have the most wonderful little snippet about Esther, but it's really remarkable that she is being portrayed as the most empowered woman you've ever seen. True girl power at its best. So with that background, we're going to enter in and collect our own information from our tradition, from the Peshat, from the straight-up reading of the actual text and some of the commentaries that come with it from our tradition and over the many thousands of years. And we're going to see and try to answer that question again, how empowered was actually Esther? And at this point, Adam, I'm having trouble forwarding my slideshow, so we're going to...
Go ahead and click on the slide itself.
Let's see. Okay, so maybe up here we go. So the first stop on our journey is going to be after Vashti has been kicked out of the palace. And the king has kind of woken up after his drunken stupor and realized that he doesn't have a queen. And the king's servants come forward and they come up with this good idea of collecting all the young virgins and what of course we communicated to our children in a very G-rated version, the beauty contest, which we of course know is not truly a beauty contest. And so here we see that these young women are gathered together. And in the Hebrew, it's with this word kabatz, to gather them. And this is interesting and doesn't seem, and the question really here is, what was that gathering process? There's one thing to let everyone know in the kingdom that young virgins can come forward and they can participate in this gathering of virgins that will enter into a harem. And there's the kind of gathering that's done by force. So while this gives us some clue as to what Esther may have experienced, I don't think it says much about her empowerment or lack of empowerment, but I think it's important to have that background as we look at this story and to really think about what did she experience, because sometimes one's empowerment can be just surviving what you're experiencing rather than being very proactive within that experience. So let's leave that question on the table while we look at the next slide and continue to gather our facts and information from the text. So this is interesting because now we learn that, as we know, Mordecai and Esther, Hadassah, have, we often speak of him as being an uncle, and sometimes we talk about him being a cousin. And here we learn the Peshat of the text, which is that he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, which really makes them cousins, for she neither had father nor mother, and the maid was beautiful and of goodly presence. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as a daughter. Now, the highlighted word, levat, as a daughter, now that's interesting because both the Talmud and the commentators, especially Rashi, building on the Talmud, point out, because of course in Hebrew you can look at things without the vowels, and read that as levat, as took her, lakach, Mordecai took her to him into his household. And they interpret this as an Tannaitic teaching in the Talmud as a wife. Now, that's interesting because most of us never hear that in our yearly Purim spiel, that rather than having a father-daughter relationship, that he perhaps has raised her in that relationship, but now it's developed into a marriage, which makes a very curious situation in terms of what's going to happen to her next. And certainly the rabbis come up with all sort of convoluted answers in order to navigate that, because in some ways it's bad enough that this nice Jewish girl is now being entered into a harem and being the king's consort and later concubine and later queen. But to be married to another man and have that all happen to you, I don't know, there's no way really to split hairs on which is worse, but it certainly creates some very interesting midrashim and answers to our rabbinic tradition. But again, we can see the extent to which she is going through these experiences. So now we're going to move forward and continue to collect some of our facts here. I just want to move back, actually. And do we have a question?
We had a comment very early on. Now I'm trying to get it to open again. Congregation did a program. Their spiel was Chicago, the Megillah. Vashti was portrayed as a feminist, and Esther is a fashion-oriented flake.
That's very interesting. And it is interesting that more in our modern age that Vashti herself is being portrayed as this wonderful feminist example, and certainly she earns that. But in contrast, Esther comes off as very lackluster in terms of her self-empowerment, of her leadership. And well, we'll continue in our study and we'll see how much that is actual and how much is that perceived, and if she earns her stripes or not. So here I just wanted to point out that the lakach is an interesting word in Hebrew because of course we saw in the last pasuk that Mordecai takes her into his household, but now she is taken to lakach Esther el Beit HaMelech, that here Esther is brought also into the king's palace. And the commentaries on this focus on not the gathering idea, but give us a little bit of commentary and color to that. And what they see within this is that she is forcibly taken out of Mordecai's house. And some of the midrashim point to the fact that Mordecai, in fact, tried to hide her, and that she is ferreted out and forcibly taken from his home. So now, with those facts, we move forward. And here we, Joan, do we have a question or comment?
Before you move on, the question was the uncle-niece relationship a prohibited relationship for marriage?
No, it certainly wasn't. In terms of, it's not uncle-niece. They're cousins because she is. Let me go back to that slide so you can see it. Wait 1 second. His uncle's, Esther, his uncle's daughter. So it's a little further away than uncle-niece, which would be. They are cousins. And in the ancient world, as we've seen in earlier biblical texts, especially in the Torah and in Levirate marriage, although Levirate marriage is a different category of familial relationship, there's a sense and a tribal sense of trying to keep people within the tribe and keep those marriages within our own society. But it's an odd circumstance no matter what. If there are literally just cousins and he's only an adopted father, what happens to her creates odd circumstances. If they are married, it creates odd circumstances that each has to be navigated in a different way and or unpleasant to think about. So it's all strange. And I personally still wonder why the Talmud and why some of the rabbinic commentators very much want them to be married. I wonder, in fact, if, and I'm still grappling with this, if perhaps the idea of having a young, beautiful virgin of age living in a household with a man just was that unseemly to the ancient world that they had to create this idea of marriage between the two of them. Maybe that just seemed too odd to them in their time period. So I'm not sure why the rabbis go down that road. It certainly opens up some interesting questions. So here back to our question, is she this good girl who just is eager to please and goes with the flow, and not one who is a strong Jew and a strong leader and understands what is happening to her is so wrong? And here we have the language that that she was pleased. This is to the head of the harem, the head eunuch, Hege, that she is pleased him and that she won his favor. And of course, he gives her all the ointments and all the spa treatments she needs. And because she is so good at being pleasing, meaning beautiful to look on perhaps, but also in her behavior, so compliant, that he advances her and to the best place in the harem. Now, there is something disturbing about this imagery in light of the way we see women today. But interestingly enough, even our tradition has some problems with this. And I think that the rabbis and the Tanaic tradition really also grapples with this. And so we have some very interesting pieces coming out of the Talmud and later the commentators on the Talmud that Esther, we're told, even though she's keeping her Judaism secret, even though she's in this very base atmosphere, even though she's in this paganistic world, non-Jewish world that's paganistic specifically, that the Talmud says that she kept kosher. Now, it doesn't say it kept kosher, but it has these images of being offered treif, and we're told that she actually refused it and that she asked for legumes and seeds instead, and therefore kept kosher. And in fact, this year there was a wonderful article in the LA Times by a cookbook and a food historian, I believe Joyce Levy, that suggested that on on Purim, we remember Esther and her striving to keep her kashrut and find her inner strength despite some very horrible outer circumstances, that we mimic this by keeping vegan on Purim, which I thought was a nice teaching and a nice food teaching. So now I'm moving forward, and so just going back for a second, so that would be like a passive, more passive way of finding inner strength, a hidden way. Esther, Hester, we know that she kept her Judaism hidden, but perhaps she also was able to exercise her resistance to her situation in her own way. And that while the text doesn't show us that level completely, maybe it was there. And in fact, our tradition not only talks about her trying to keep the laws of kashrut, but trying to keep several of the Jewish mitzvot, including the laws of nidah, of menstruation, and when you're clean and not clean, according to that, and others, maybe even perhaps Shabbat. Just interesting facts there to see how much resistance she really could have to her situation. So now there are many psukim, many verses which point to maybe that she's just a tool, that she's just an extension of Mordecai and what he tells her to do. And we have some very strong language here in which Mordecai, well, the English says charged her, but it's from the word tzivah, like mitzvah, commandment, really commands her to not tell. We see that Mordecai is ever present as the shadow, and while they can't have direct communication with one another, that he is ever present by walking before the court of the harem, and these servants running back and forth to be messengers between the two of them. And he is continually guiding her in what to do. And then again in verse 20 that we see that tzivah again, that Mordecai commanded or charged her not to tell her about her people or her country. And so we see, now another image of Esther. So now as we move on, we see that it's her turn to go into the king, and that she asks for nothing. So I think that's interesting. Again, as a child, that was always presented to me, at least in my religious school education and the books that I had available to me as a young child, as not being someone who's grabby, that even if all these wonderful jewels and clothes and ointments and all these kinds of things were available to her, that she was a person who didn't ask for this, and this was a good thing. So, which opens a very interesting question about what it is, what are the values that we want young women and ourselves to embrace. Is it that these, that as Jews we should ask for nothing, or are we allowed to ask for what we need? But here it's painted as on the Peshat of the text, that from the Haggai, the head eunuchs, the keeper of the women, that he thinks this is a good thing, and she finds favor, and everybody else finds favor. And part of it is it that her outer beauty is winning all this favor? The rabbinic tradition talks extensively about her amazing beauty. Or is it the values, whether, again, we think these are good values, to ask for nothing, to have no needs, or is it intrinsically a good value or not? But are these the values that are catching people's eye? Interesting question. Okay, so now we get to a little food teaching, which of course I love. And here we see that when Mordecai, we're jumping forward in the text, when Mordecai hears the proclamation that that through Haman's manipulation of the king, that the king has made this command that all the Jews are going to be killed, all their possessions taken, that when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came before the king's gate, for no one might enter into the king's gate with sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So here, this is interesting because it is, I'm sorry, my English translation, I seem to have lost a couple of words there. And this is when Esther sends out messengers. She hears about it and wants to, for him to wear normal clothes, and he won't accept them. Now this is an interesting contrast, and we're going to be studying this pasuk later in just a bit, in contrast to what Esther does with fasting. But here we, of course, see two things. We see that Mordecai himself as a leader, as someone who's at least the mourning so overtakes him, and he so has an understanding of the situation, that he mourns loudly, publicly, and in an unreserved way. And one wonders the connection between verse 1 and verse 3. Is it that that Mordecai's mourning in this public way is an example that others take on and continue in his example? Or is it that he does this spontaneously because this was an ancient practice? We see many other cases in the Tanakh in which people do this and put on the sackcloth, put on the ashes, the crying, this very outward demonstration of their inner pain. And so he's just one of many people who spontaneously do this. And we see the word som. I've highlighted that in blue so you can see that very nicely about the word fasting. So now we're going to move forward.
Okay.
And we see, yes?
We had another comment, but I think it was from the previous slide.
Okay, we can go back.
Really, I guess two back at this point. If she asked for something, then she would be selling herself.
Mm.
And person writes, I think there is a name for such a person.
There is a name for such a person. That's true. So, and that does raise an interesting question about that. That's a nice comment. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going back. I call this the I'm going to pretend I don't know you. Kind of, I think of this as kind of Esther's teenage moment. So here, Esther learns of what Mordecai is doing, and she sends out the garments, and he won't take them. Our rabbinic tradition is very torn about what this moment is about. Whether it's that she's literally embarrassed, that she wants to distance herself from her Jewish community at this moment of danger, that she doesn't think that this reaction is necessary on the more kind of optimistic what she does. There's even commentary that says that maybe she is more optimistic and thinks that God will actually save the day, and maybe this isn't warranted. But in any case, this really kind of is more on the side of building the case for someone who is not empowered, someone who doesn't want to make waves and do such dramatic public things, or have her relative do that. Okay, so now we're building up to the drama of the story, the meat of the story. And here through this messenger system of servants again, she is told, rather she tells Mordecai and reveals her fears, this fear factor, that she cannot go into the king, we know this very well, that you'll be put to death. Which is interesting because in Vashti's case, we don't see that she dies, and we just know she goes away. But here, Esther has the fear of death, which is interesting because, of course, we all know that as a Jew, she would die anyhow, so it's death or death. But here, she's more consumed with the moment of having to take that responsibility personally and to be charged personally with a death sentence. So we're going to move forward now, and here in the penultimate moment before the pivotal switch in the story, we see that Mordecai comes to Esther, and of course with these famous words, think not yourself that you will escape in the king's palace, that you shall escape more than all the Jews. If you remain silent at this time, then relief and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. Now that's interesting itself because then it's really, even whatever she does after this, even if she becomes empowered and does lots of great leadership and brave actions, even though God is not directly mentioned in Megillat Esther, if it wasn't going to be her, it still would have come. But with this warning, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows, of course, whether or not you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Maybe it's beshert, maybe it's fated. Okay, so now, because I highlighted you and your father's house, because in the rest of the Pesukim I show you having to do with whether or not the Jews are going to be killed and how Esther sees the situation, it raises the question of whether she's doing this out of self-concern and preservation or communal and trying to save her people. Okay, so now this is my favorite vignette of the whole story, and I think that this is, especially verse 16, is the moment when everything changes. Everything changes not only for Esther, but for the entire narrative of this beautifully written book of Esther. Just the wonderful folding and unfolding, the reversal of everything comes together all in this pivotal pasuk. So here, she again sending the messenger back and forth says, "Go gather together all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, day or night. And I'm covered up here on my, wait a second, and I also and my girls will fast likewise. So I will go to the king, and though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So now this is just chock full of a new type of energy from Esther. So perhaps the fire that Mordecai lit under her finally has taken, and she is woken up to the situation. She's gotten past her fear of personally putting herself in peril, dying, and she sees the importance of her station, her place in the king's life and in the monarchy, and that she sees that she can do something about this horrible situation. And so the language is, she again uses the word som, to fast, that she even defines it. It's nice because you have not only the word fasting, but the self-definition of that word, neither eat nor drink for 3 days. So we see that's not eating or drinking. We see it's this prolonged period of 3 days, and that she herself and her hand servants are going to also do this. And then after that, she's going to go into the king. And I love the fact that at the end, we have now the mirror image. Before, Mordecai was commanding her, tzivah, her, and now she, tzivta, she commands him. And so we now have her being truly empowered and taking the leadership. Joan, do we have a question or comment?
Nope.
Nope, okay. So Adam, I'll just mention to you that my go-to webinar panel has disappeared on me. When I was clicking, I think I hit it by accident.
No worries. We'll pass along questions and pull results again.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. And so now we're going to learn a little bit more about all of this. Okay, and now I'm trying to move forward. And we ask the meta question, why did Esther fast? And certainly if any of you have some comments or to add at this point why you think she fasted, please feel free to jump in. Let's see. Yes.
I suggest that you wait a second to give people a chance to type stuff in.
Of course. We'll go back to that.
I'll give you a minute or so.
Okay. Putting up this slide again just so you can kind of meditate on it as you offer us some comments and reaction to that big question, why does she fast? And I'll just add that there are many different ways that one could react at such a moment, pivotal moment. We saw Mordecai, for instance, rend his clothes to put on the sackcloth, to put on the ashes, to cry aloud. So we see other modes of communicating at moments of stress. Joan, should I move forward at this point?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. If anyone wants to add a comment, let me know. Joan, what were you saying?
That if somebody types in, I'll interrupt you.
Okay, wonderful. So here I asked the question, was her choice to fast an issue of original leadership, or was she merely finally following Mordecai and the community? In that Mordecai, of course, I emphasized already that he put on the sackcloth and rent his clothes and cries out. But also there was great mourning among the Jews and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So going back in the story, so maybe she's finally catching up and waking up, and she's joining her brethren and actually doing these things. And while she herself wouldn't rent her clothes and put on the sackcloth and the ashes, because we already know that's forbidden to be done within the king's gate, but she's doing the part that she is allowed to, and that she's making up from lost time. So in that sense, that would give us more weight to the fact that she is the compliant good girl, and that she is finally waking up and getting in line with Mordecai's model. And we see, of course, the psalm again. So let's just take a side trip to see a little bit about fasting in the greater Hebrew Bible, to add some little more information to this idea of fasting and why someone might choose that as a mode. So here are some fasting facts. And fasting itself is not an end to itself. Throughout the Tanakh, we see that people fast and that there's always some sort of goal behind it. We see that fasts come in two different forms. One is the ordained or fixed, and the other is spontaneous. And spontaneous fasts are public and sometimes personal, meaning that sometimes people do it as a group and sometimes people do it merely as an individual. Here in the book of Esther, we see that a spontaneous fast, meaning that even if Mordecai is the first one to do it and create a model of leadership for the community, he doesn't make a proclamation to the community that they should or have to fast with him. But rather, as people hear the news of the horrible news, people throughout the kingdom and the different 127 provinces spontaneously, yet publicly and together, begin to fast. So again, why might they be doing this? What is the significance? So in the Torah, we see two different words, two different categories. We see the tzom, which we've seen here in the book of Esther, the word for fasting. But then we have the ti'anu et nafshotechem, which is the afflicting of the soul, the nefesh. And of course, that's the word that is associated with our best known fast, the ordained fixed fast of Yom Kippur. And here you can see the command for Yom Kippur, which does not use the word tzom. It just says that you will afflict your souls. And again, this nefesh. And it's linked to rest, of not working, and it is communal. So now we're just going to gather a few more facts. Here, I've brought the one verse from a large section in Numbers, which talks about all the different types of vows that a woman may make, and that her husband or any male who is in charge of her, like her father, for instance, or perhaps her adopted father, like Mordecai, that a woman can, when she makes a vow or binding oath, and here it's interesting, we have the same language again, to afflict the soul, that her husband may let it stand or her husband may make it void. I just thought that was an interesting passage to tease out at this moment, because we see that Esther herself is proclaiming and making a vow to fast and making this binding oath to afflict the soul. In her case, she's using the word tzom, the word to fast, but because of the way our understanding of afflict the soul, we know that it can include fasting, as it does for Yom Kippur, that even if she takes this leadership, potentially the men in her life, it wouldn't be King Ahasuerus, but maybe Mordecai would send a message and say, don't do it, or something like that, and can void it. So even the most empowered woman, unfortunately, in ancient times, was tethered. Just to give you a little bit more background, again, the arsenal of information about what fasting meant within the Torah. Interestingly enough, Yom Kippur fasting was the only fixed fast until the post-exilic period, meaning after the destruction of the first temple. And it's only into Zechariah that we see other fixed fasts, and they all have to do with critical periods and the ongoing story of the destruction of the temple. Just a little side fact. So again, back to our big question. So we learn about fixed fasts, but we also see that in the Bible that fasts can be a reaction to calamity, human or natural, a threat, something that is either threatened to be or has already happened to the entire community. So that in these spontaneous, non-fixed fasts, fasting can be a way to supplicate God to end famine. And here in the book of Joel, we have a famine caused by a plague of locusts, and that's a reaction to try to catch God's attention, to get into God's good graces in order to remove the plague of locusts. We also see fasts during wartime. We see that the community of Israel fasts when there's a war against the Philistines, which is actually interesting because you would think when one is going to war, you would need every bit of strength you could muster up. And instead the reaction is to fast because getting in God's good graces and catching God's attention and perhaps doing any kind of repentance one needs to do to be in order with God is more important than having that strength through food. And we've seen two nice examples of this, one from Samuel and the other from Judges. So now we're going to continue on. And we also see a category of fasts of preparation. And so we know that Moses fasted for 40 days before meeting God. You know exactly what that means, if he had some sort of supernatural power that we don't know about to sustain a fast for 40 days, or if it was some sort of modified fast. That's a question. We know that Saul fasted the day before the appearance of seeing Samuel's spirit or apparition or ghost or something like that. We see that in Samuel. And when Daniel's prayers were answered by a vision, he prepares for that by fasting. So it seems to be a preparation for meeting either God, encountering God, or a spirit, some sort of spirit. Now, this is interesting because this can inform us about Esther's fast. Was she fasting as a preparation because she needs to gather her strength? This is often the way the story is painted for us in just the folk telling of it. Was it some sort of supplication? Was it just prayers as an act of catching God's attention, of praying to God, for asking for God's assistance at this pivotal moment, both for her personally but also communally? Was it, as Mordecai and the people seemed to live out the fasting, as a ritual of mourning, of dismay, of communicating their very deep sense of rending on the inside, that they do the rending of the clothes on the outside, the sackcloth, the ashes, and the fasting and crying, that whole package of communicating great pain and distress? Or is it perhaps atonement? I'm going to get to that last one in a second. Before I move on, I do want to point out some interesting midrashim. The rabbis are a little upset that Esther is fasting for 3 days because they point out that she wouldn't look her best, that when she finally goes into the king, that she has to be radiant and beautiful in order to overcome the great peril and ensure that he is totally taken with her so that he doesn't want to have her killed. And they write that she is so beautiful, and with God's help, she's able to overcome the pallor and the ashen look that she'll gain from fasting from 3 days, and that she'll be able to still look her best. So it's interesting, this point of view. But let's go back to the atonement, because that's even more interesting.
Excuse me? We have some comments.
Please.
Question. As the king's favorite, could she have fasted to get the king's attention?
There's no sign in the Peshat of the text, in the simple reading of the text, that he would have known about her fasting. But on the other hand, there are other midrashim which show to us that it's a very small community, meaning that when Mordecai is walking back and forth in front of the gate, that the king and his household are completely aware of this, with the messengers going back and forth, so that there would be talk within the king's world about what was happening with Esther and Mordecai. So it is possible that maybe it was to build some sympathy. But I haven't seen that actually written in our tradition, but I like it.
And the other comment is on atonement, and you said you were going to get to that in a second. So tell me when you want it.
Okay, so if I don't, if whoever's offered that comment is either in agreement with something I'm teaching or in addition to what I'm teaching, please let us know, okay? So here, we're going to have a little flashback. So here the question is, if Esther's fasting and leading everybody else in fasting is indeed atonement, what would they be atoning for? Now, before they would face such a horrific moment, you may just want a clean slate with God. You may want to be 100% on God's good side and therefore completely have a cheshbon nefesh, a true look at one's soul, and to take a full accounting of all your deeds as individuals and as a community. But our tradition actually offers a specific reason why they may need to atone for their sins. So here we see that very early on in the narrative, in chapter 1, verse 8, that the drinking, the command at the very beginning, this is before Vashti says no and all that, during this huge party that King Ahasuerus has for all these men, the drinking was according to the law. Nobody compelled, meaning nobody forced to do this, for the king had instructed to all the officials of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. So in the Hebrew, we have this ish va'ish. That's interesting. So meaning this man and this man. Meaning every man. Perhaps you could want to translate it that. Ritzon, the pleasure of every man. But what does that exactly mean? So here, our tradition points to the fact that even though nobody was forced to party with the king, that the Jews of the kingdom did anyhow. And this is a problem because, of course, it's not like today if I have a party and I say, well, nobody has to come, but please come. You might come to my house and you may have a drink or something like this, but it would just be a drink. In ancient times, things having to do with wine especially were mixed with paganism. And we see this actually in the ongoing development of the laws of kashrut having to do with wine and grape products, that there's a great fear of the type of libations that were given to pagan gods. And that's why the laws having to do with kosher wine are so strict about making sure that the wine products are not part of some sort of pagan ritual. And in fact, the Midrashim describes some very detailed accounts of what happened perhaps in the ancient world in terms of special cups that people would drink out of. There are other Midrashim, in fact, saying that this was the chalice that came out of the first temple that is being misused for such a base reason. But here, the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Torah, adds the words that according to every man's pleasure is the will of each Jew and every non-Jew. So specifically pointing to the fact that Jews did participate in this party, and they did so with non-Jews. Now, the Torah, and rather the rabbinic tradition and the ongoing commentators are concerned with this because, not because of xenophobia, but because of the mixing of Jews and non-Jews. They're concerned when alcohol is involved what that will lead to. So here, Rashi, much later, explains that this is in contrast to some parties at which the guests are compelled to drink. So he seems to be pointing very much so to that the Jews did actually want to participate in this great party. And Rashi, in a different section of commentary, says that the fasting is Esther's fast is repentance for Jewish people bowing down to idols during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. So he doesn't link it to this verse, but other types of idolatry at a different time. Now, a much later commentary, this Ma'am Le'oz, is an 18th century homiletic biblical commentary that's in Ladino, offers this, that the fast is an atonement for the sin of enjoying Ahasuerus' banquet, which was, and points to the fact that it was certainly base and probably pagan. So again, we see a lot of concern about what the Jews were doing at this party. So I know we're coming towards the end of our hour of study together. So I'm now, Joan?
The comment missed something. You didn't, Kizo knows something you didn't say.
Okay, please.
That it was in atonement. She became a woman, not a teenager. She recognized she was lacking in how she supported her people when she was in a position of power.
Very nice. So it becomes an act of personal atonement, not only communal. Very nice. So here I'd like to offer one more take, my personal point of view about why Esther fasts at this moment. And rather than it being in the classical model of what we see in other models of the Tanakh, that her idea to fast has to do with taking control of her body. That from those very early verses, and that we see that the young virgins are being rounded up, and we see the word lakach, that she's taken from her cousin, uncle's, husband's, whatever it is, Mordecai's house, that from that moment on, she is truly not in control of her body. And along the way, she gives some attempts of taking control of her body, perhaps by not taking the offer of all the beautiful clothes and jewels and trying to distance herself from those material things that she's offered, to not see herself as a prostitute. That perhaps the other clues we get is her unwillingness to eat treif and not to eat things which aren't kosher, and to pick what she's going to eat. But now her resistance is completely outright, public, in that she declares this fast and that she takes control of her body by the one thing, taking control, rather, of the one thing that she has complete control of, that she starts to have leadership and empowerment, and in turn take control of Jewish history by taking full control of her body through fasting, the one thing that she truly has full control over in her position. And so when she fasts for the 3 days, perhaps it embodies these other values that we've seen, but I also see it that the fasting is the vehicle through which she fully enacts her self-empowerment. So then, just to throw in a few facts, I'm really going to go through this quickly since we're coming to the end of our hour. We see the great moment when she finally goes in and the king puts out the golden scepter, and of course this, the rabbis see that she is, in fact, every other time she's forced into sex because of her circumstance, but here because she willingly goes into him, she herself is initiating what can be construed as a sexual act, or an act that would lead to a sexual act. And leading the question, is a golden scepter a golden scepter, or is it sometimes a cigar? And here, moving forward, we see some very beautiful, empowered language in terms of being smart, of knowing how to talk to the king, how to manipulate the situation, and to create the stage for what she's ultimately going to have to do, which is to tell her situation and ask him to save her people. But she talks about her life, she talks about her people's life, and she says, I and my people are to be destroyed. Now what's interesting is that later when she finally says the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman, it says that Haman was afraid before the king and queen. And I love the fact that the king and queen here are equal and parallel in the sentence. And it is as if in this moment she's fully come into her power. We're going to skip over this since we don't have time. This is an interesting side journey, and hopefully we'll get to study this in the future. Here we see see a question, because here she is given the privilege of being the custodian of Haman's wealth and over his household, and she in turn hands that responsibility over to Mordecai. So is she still truly in charge? Is she making a good choice? Or is she just returning to her old habits of having deference to Mordecai being in charge? We see the continued way that she knows how to talk to the king in a very supplicating way, but at the same time she's in charge behind that. And perhaps that is in fact her MO, that she is one that doesn't appear to have power but has it within that structure. That's an intrinsic question. Here I found this pasuk in pasuk 6 interesting because it doesn't really point to the fact that she herself would die. It says, "For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my people?" So it doesn't say that it's going to happen to her here, although we have other verses that do say it. Just interesting. We're going to jump forward because I really want to end with this. Here, this is after everything has happened, and she is, then Esther, the queen, wrote with all authority. I love that. Very different Esther than we saw at the beginning of our story. To confirm the second letter of Purim and the sending out of letters throughout the kingdom, and proclaiming the days of Purim. And again with the fasting lamentation, and the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim. So now we see that not only has she been a political leader, one to save the day, but here we see that she also is taking religious authority to proclaim the ongoing celebration of Purim. Now, interestingly enough, our tradition does not seem so comfortable with a strong Esther. So, for instance, again, the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Bible, adds the words to Esther's decree on the hands of Mordecai, meaning that they link Mordecai to her decree so that it's not clear whose authority, whose authority it is coming, Esther's or Mordecai's. And Rashi adds, Esther requested that the scholars of the generation establish this and write it down along with the other books, meaning that she does not actually decree Purim, but rather she requests of men that they decree Purim. And so we will end with a final poll. Adam? We invite you all to consider. Don't be swayed by the things you heard at the end of this presentation. Think of the totality of everything we've studied over the last hour to again consider the question, was she empowered or unempowered?
And while you're doing that, let me just, because we are running out of time, I just want to remind you that our next Torah Live webinar will be on April 6th, and we will have some text in preparation for Pesach. And if you would like to do some more intensive study, registration is open for the Summer Learning Institute and COLA, which will be held August 8th to the 12th in Cincinnati, Ohio at Hebrew College. For more information, urj.org/summer. And I hope we've got 86% have voted, so almost time to consider the options.
So just to remind you.
And she became more as the story goes. Continued.
So there's the final results for everyone.
So I can't see it. Adam and Jones, one of you will have to read it.
77% say 4, and 23% say 3.
So a bit of a shift. Well, with that, our tradition, of course, leaves it up for grabs. And just want to see the next slide. And I want to wish everyone, it's a little premature, but now I think we've officially left Purim. It's time to get ready for Passover, as our tradition teaches us that as we clean up the crumbs from the Purim Seudah, the Purim meal, clean up all those Hamantash crumbs, it's the beginning of our preparations for Passover. And unfortunately, I could not find a picture of a woman leading a Seder, so this guy is going to be leading the Seder. And we say Hag Sameach to everyone.
Hag Sameach, and thank you very much, Mary. And hope you all will join us again in April or during the summer at the Summer Learning Institute. Have a good day.